Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. It's New Show Week. This Thursday, March 12th, Massachusetts Unsolved Map of the Missing, live podcast recording, off Cabot, Beverly, Massachusetts. I have a number of cases to cover. We will talk about missing people across the state of Massachusetts. I will go back decades and talk about the oldest unsolved missing persons cases in the Commonwealth. We will talk about some very recent missing persons cases that haven't made the news at all, or very little, and some of the biggest missing persons mysteries in Massachusetts. We're all over the map. Everything about the show can be found at crimeofthetruestkind.com and follow at Crime of the Truest Kind. Crime of the Truest Kind is about crime stories and history and the things that happen here in Massachusetts and New England. I look at how violence and loss and wrongdoing collide in local culture and history. I tell crime stories. I talk about missing people and murders, unsolved cases, negligence. It is just as much about mistreatment and abuses and the unfairness of the systems we operate in society as it is about the crimes themselves. We look at the quintessential crimes of the region, the defining ones, the unanswered ones, the events that stay with us. I often talk about cases where the injustice and the harm are undeniable, examining how power, prestige, justice, and sometimes even morality intersect with how society treats one another, especially our most vulnerable, digging deeper into the context of the story and what it was like at the time. So for this episode 100, I wanted to do something a little bit different. Now, those of you who listen with any regularity or follow me online, you know that I love Massachusetts history. I love things about Massachusetts and New England. Sometime around the anniversary of their passing, I wrote a mini episode about the plane crash involving John F. Kennedy Jr., Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, his wife, and Carolyn Bessette's sister, Lauren Bessette. I know there are probably many of you who remember the happenings in the summer of 1999 when that plane was lost. So many of us watched that coverage as they searched for the plane off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. We all wanted them to be found by some miracle. It was captivating, much like what happened in November 1963 when President John F. Kennedy was shot. The stories of the Kennedys have been a very poignant part of our history. I've never been one who follows the royals. In fact, if I read anything that says Markle, I typically roll my eyes where I'm standing. The Kennedy family was our version of a royal family, at least in Massachusetts and New England, and for many people outside of here. They are loved and hated equally. I will talk about the Kennedy family, their legacy, their triumphs, their tragedies, their misdeeds, and talk about the era of Camelot, how Jackie Kennedy so eloquently put it. Jackie Kennedy was beloved. She taught the world about grace. I have talked about this case. I say case like it was litigated in a court of law. It was not. It was a tragic event in a series of tragic events in our history. The Kennedy family has long been a source of admiration and reverence and entertainment, scorn and ridicule, and very bad behavior. The Kennedy family of Brookline, Massachusetts became a powerful political lightning rod, accompanied by a certain kind of Schadenfreude. I say that word differently every time. That's how I'm saying it today. It's like when the public at large seems to get a measure of pleasure from someone's misfortune. We often see it when it comes to celebrity and influence. The history of the Kennedy family that we have come to know over these many decades started back in the 1800s. I'll give you some backstory. The father of President John F. Kennedy, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, was born in Boston. Now, his father, JFK's grandfather, was Patrick Joseph P.J. Kennedy. He was a power player in the city. But it was the former Kennedy that brought the family name into the era of political prominence and wealth. The early 1900s would see a rivalry between P.J. Kennedy and John Francis Honey Fitz Fitzgerald. Kennedy thought Honey Fitz was gaining too much political power. Honey Fitz was elected to the House of Representatives and served as mayor of Boston. Two rivals who will ultimately become responsible for what we know as the Kennedy legacy. They certainly didn't know it at the time. P.J. Kennedy's son, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, he attended Boston schools and went on to Harvard University. While vacationing with their families at Old Orchard Beach in Maine, Joe Kennedy met a young girl named Rose. Their courtship began much to the dismay of her father. Rose Elizabeth Fitzgerald was also born in Boston and the oldest of John Francis Honey Fitz Fitzgerald's 6 children. Joe Kennedy was dating P.J. Kennedy's political rival's daughter. Young Rose went to Boston schools, studied at the New England Conservatory, and at what was known then as Manhattanville College of the Sacred Heart in Manhattan. Rose Fitzgerald had longed to go to Wellesley College, but young Rose was forbidden by her father. She has said in the past that her greatest regret was not having gone to Wellesley College, something that made her quite sad. On October 7th, 1914, Rose Fitzgerald married Joseph Patrick Kennedy. She was 24, he was 26. And history began. Over 18 years of marriage, Rose and Joe Kennedy had 9 children together. Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. in 1915, John, 1917, Rosemary, 1918, Kathleen in 1920, Eunice in 1921, Patricia, 1924, Robert, 1925, Jean in 1928, and Edward in 1932. They were a big Irish Catholic family, and the reason why the Kennedys have so many cousins. Myths about the Kennedys abound. The legend of Camelot was part power, part privilege, part glamour and sophistication, but also calamity. I have often heard the term the Kennedy curse. It is something that has overshadowed everything else. The trials and tribulations of this family goes far beyond bad luck. Untimely deaths, terrible accidents, serious injury, national scandal, misadventure. What we know for sure is that the Kennedy family was visited by loss and grief. Rosemary Kennedy is the 3rd child and first daughter. She was born in 1918, when the Spanish flu was raging, killing millions. Well, the doctor who was to attend her birth at their home in Brookline didn't arrive on time. The nurse that was present, who was certainly capable of delivering the baby, she did not want Rose Kennedy to deliver that baby and wanted her to hold the baby inside. Babies do what they want. Instead of delivering the baby, she held the baby in the birth canal. The actions of this nurse that day in prohibiting baby Rosemary from being born would have catastrophic effects. Because of the lack of oxygen, Rosemary Kennedy was born with brain damage and was developmentally delayed into adulthood. She would go on to have what they called fits, or episodes, but what it really was seizures given her condition. Rosemary began to show erratic behavior. They feared that she would get a bad reputation and that it would reflect poorly on the family and her brother's political aspirations. Father Joe Kennedy, looking for some kind of answer for his daughter, agreed to a lobotomy. Now, he did not speak to Rosemary herself or his wife Rose. In fact, Rose Kennedy said she didn't know anything about it until after it already happened. In 1941, at age 23, Rosemary Kennedy was given a lobotomy. If you have never read what is done to a person during a lobotomy, I will tell you this: it is savagery. Immediately after the procedure, it was clear that this was a failed experiment. This was no cure for her condition. Rosemary was left completely disabled. She could no longer walk or talk. Her family would hide her away, making excuses as to why she was no longer present in their lives. Rosemary was sent to live in a residential care facility in Wisconsin. Her family did not visit her for 20 years. It is where she lived out her days until she died in 2005. Tragedy continued. The oldest Kennedy son, Joe Jr., who at 29 was being groomed for that top office. He was killed in World War II after foregoing his last year at Harvard Law to enlist. Joe Jr. went on to fly more than 25 combat missions, and by 1944, he was ready to return home. But before he went, he volunteered for one final mission, for Operation Aphrodite, a top-secret and dangerous mission. It entailed flying a remote-control bomber loaded with explosives toward an artillery site in northern France. A second plane was supposed to take over and control it remotely. Once everything was in place, Joe and his co-pilot were to bail out, and the plane would continue unmanned to the target. But over the town of Blythburgh on the eastern coast of England, those explosives detonated prematurely, and Kennedy and his 35-year-old co-pilot, Wilfred John Willey, were killed instantly. That's something I never knew until researching this story. Tragedy and loss became unrelenting for this family. And many of these family tragedies involved an airplane. Sister Kathleen Kick Kennedy, her father's favorite, she became a journalist and worked for the Red Cross in London during the height of the war. In 1944, she met and became engaged to William Billy Cavendish, or Lord Hartington, the future Duke of Devonshire. But her family, more importantly her mother Rose, were angry, learning that her new husband wished to raise their children as Protestants. Rose Kennedy wrote in her diary that she was horrified and heartbroken her daughter was marrying him. At their wedding in May 1944, her brother Joe Jr. was the only Kennedy to attend. The honeymoon ended abruptly, as her new husband Billy, a member of the British Army, was killed by sniper fire in Belgium 4 months after their wedding, and 1 month after Joe Jr. was killed over England. Kathleen, Lady Hartington, by then, she stayed in England. She rejoined the Red Cross as a volunteer in the fall of 1944. And when the war ended, she made a brief return to see her family and returned to live out her days in London. She began a relationship with Earl Peter Wentworth Fitzwilliam, a wealthy, married Protestant British soldier with a seat in the House of Lords. When Kathleen told her parents he promised to leave his wife and marry her, this was a bad look for the family, and they were furious. In May of 1948, Kathleen made a plan to meet her father in Paris, perhaps to gain his approval to be married. It is believed that Lord Peter was divorcing his wife. 2 days before she was to meet with her father, Kathleen and the Lord were flying to Cannes on a small plane. They stopped to refuel in Paris, citing a severe storm ahead. The pilot did not want to continue. Lord Peter demanded they continued the flight. They flew into a terrible storm and lost all radio contact. The pilot was right to not want to go on. That 10-seater plane with 4 on board was tossed around the sky. The plane crashed over France. There were no survivors. And Joe Sr., who had a planned trip to France that week, had to identify his daughter. John F. Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy had 2 living children, Caroline and John Jr., who we will get to. On August 23, 1956, Jackie gave birth to their first child. Their stillborn daughter was given the name Arabella. Caroline Kennedy arrived in 1957. JFK won the 1960 election, and 2 weeks later, Jackie delivered John F. Kennedy Jr. He arrived 3 weeks early with very concerning respiratory problems. The resident doctor had to perform a tracheotomy on the infant and help inflate his lungs so he could breathe, ultimately saving little John's life. On August 7, 1963, Jackie and John Kennedy's third child arrived via emergency C-section 6 weeks early. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy lived for 2 days. The loss of baby Patrick had an enormous effect on both President Kennedy and Jackie. 3 months later, on November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed as he rode through the city of Dallas in a motorcade. He was just 46 years old. Jackie was riding beside him in that car and witnessed everything. Mourning the loss of her infant son Patrick, now she had to witness the assassination of her husband. Jackie Bouvier Kennedy showed more strength and grace than the world had ever seen before. The country mourned with her. 3 days later, on his 3rd birthday, John Kennedy Jr. saluted his father. Captured in a photo, it became one of the most iconic images of that time. In 1964, less than 1 year after JFK's assassination, Edward Ted Kennedy, the youngest of the Kennedy children, barely survived a plane crash. The small twin-engine plane carrying Kennedy, Kennedy aide Edward Moss, Indiana Senator Birch Bay, his wife Marvella, and pilot Edwin Zimney crashed in an orchard 3 miles short of the runway in Westfield, Massachusetts. Birch and Marvella Bay were not seriously hurt, but Moss and Zimney would die of their injuries. Ted Kennedy had 3 broken vertebrae, 2 broken ribs, and a collapsed lung. Senator Bay dragged him free of the wreckage, saving his life. Their seating position made all the difference. And I have talked about this. The people with the minor injuries were in the back of the plane. Ted Kennedy was in the middle, rear-facing seat, and the 2 who did not survive were in the front of the plane. I wrote a piece a few years ago about how to survive a plane crash. Perhaps I will turn that into another episode. On June 5, 1968, after winning the California primary, 42-year-old Robert F. Bobby Kennedy, the 3rd Kennedy's son, was shot at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. He died in the early hours of June 6th. This is just 1 month after Dr. Martin Luther King is killed in Memphis. It was a night of pure chaos. And there to witness all of it, Bobby's wife, Ethel, who was pregnant with their daughter, Rory, who would never meet her father. Rory arrived in December 1968. Together, Ethel and Bobby had 11 children: Kathleen, Joseph II, Robert Jr., David, Courtney, Michael, Kerry, Christopher, Max, Douglas, and Rory. God bless her if she remembered all their names. It was Rory's wedding that John Jr. and Carolyn were headed to that last weekend. July 1969, Ted Kennedy, the sole surviving Kennedy son, left a party on Chappaquiddick Island, reportedly headed for the ferry to bring him back to Edgartown, Martha's Vineyard. He took a sharp turn onto Dyke Road and missed the ramp to the narrow wooden bridge, and the boat of a car he was driving fell into the water. Ted Kennedy was not the only person in the car that night. Also inside was Mary Jo Kopechne, a 28-year-old woman who attended the party as a reunion for her and 5 other women who worked on the 1968 presidential campaign for the late Senator Robert F. Kennedy, the Boiler Room Girls. The events of that night still generate a lot of debate about what happened. Now, Mary Jo left her things behind, her pocketbook and her room key. Why would she have done that if they were headed to catch the ferry over to Edgartown, as has been reported? A police officer would later recount seeing what looked like Ted Kennedy's Oldsmobile speeding toward the bridge around 12:40 a.m. But the ferry had stopped operating by then. Ted Kennedy escaped that accident. Mary Jo did not. Ted Kennedy did not report the accident for 10 hours. There is quite a lot to the Chappaquiddick story, far more than I will get into in this episode. Ted Kennedy continued as a senator for Massachusetts, and he did some good. But president, that was not going to happen. Ted Kennedy never recovered from that night, for leaving Mary Jo to die in that car, for not reporting the accident, for having her body scuttled off the island very quickly. The way the Kopechne family was treated, criminal. They were not explained the circumstances of their daughter's death, and they agreed to forego autopsy because, as they understood it initially, Mary Jo died accidentally. They did not know Ted Kennedy was driving. More bad behavior. And Ted, did he get away with murder? In August 1973, Joe Kennedy II, the 20-year-old son of Bobby and Ethel, he flipped the Jeep he was driving in Nantucket. One of the passengers in that accident, 18-year-old Pamela Kelly, was paralyzed from the chest down. Her boyfriend, David Kennedy, another of Bobby and Ethel's sons, he too was hurt in that Jeep accident. Everything changed for Pamela Kelly that day. One could say that things changed for David Kennedy too. That Nantucket Jeep accident introduced him to a lifetime of strong painkillers. David Kennedy and his brother Robert Jr. would go on to find a lot more trouble where drugs are involved. Pamela Kelly, that girl who was 18 when she was paralyzed that summer day, did receive a settlement. It was not enough for a lifetime of care, even though she was told she wouldn't live past 40. Pamela Kelly got married. She had children. She became an advocate for disability rights. Pamela Kelly passed away on November 20th, 2020 at age 65. She outlived a lot of Kennedys. 1983, Robert Jr. was arrested for heroin possession. While Robert Jr. eventually cleaned up from drugs and got a worm in his brain, he is currently in charge of the Department of Health and Human Services of the United States of America. He's currently talking about getting people to eat healthier. Where have I heard that before? 1984, David Anthony Kennedy, son of Bobby and Ethel, who was in that Jeep accident, he died of a drug overdose in a Palm Beach hotel on April 26th. He was 28 years old. David was just 13 when, alone in a hotel room, he saw his father Bobby shot live on TV. Imagine that kind of traumatic experience. You're alone, you're 13, and no one comes to comfort you for a very long time. 1991, William Kennedy Smith, son of Jean Kennedy, a 30-year-old medical student at Georgetown University, he was accused of sexually assaulting a 29-year-old woman at the Kennedy family's Palm Beach compound. Maybe you remember that. During the trial, he took the stand and testified that he had sex with the woman, but it was consensual. At the trial, Judge Mary E. Lupo barred prosecutors from presenting testimony from 3 other women who claimed that Smith had assaulted them. The trial was televised, with the woman's identity electronically obscured. That woman, Patricia Bowman, chose to identify herself publicly after Smith was acquitted. He went on to become a doctor, caring for victims of landmines. In 2004, another woman who had worked as his assistant at the nonprofit Center for International Rehabilitation filed a lawsuit accusing him of sexual assault. Somewhere along the line, it was dismissed. He has used the "I'm a Kennedy" defense, meaning because of his family and his background that he is vulnerable to these kinds of accusations. So much pain and tragedy has visited this family. On May 19, 1994, Jacqueline Lee Bouvier Kennedy Onassis died at home in Manhattan, 1 year after being diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Her condition was discovered after a riding accident. She passed on peacefully at home, with Caroline and John by her side. She was only 64 years old. My wish for Jackie was a long and restful, private life. But I also find it merciful that she did not have to witness the death of another child. 1997, Michael Kennedy, age 39, another of Bobby and Ethel Kennedy's sons. He dies on New Year's Eve in Aspen, Colorado, the result of running into a tree while playing football on skis. But earlier in 1997, he was the gross old guy going after the babysitter. I know, not a legal term. Allegedly, when that babysitter was just 14. Now the news has called it a relationship, an affair. It is not a relationship. It is not an affair. It is statutory rape. Michael Kennedy, who was living in Cohasset at the time, did not face charges for statutory rape. After the Norfolk County DA, citing the minor involved in their unwillingness to cooperate, called off the investigation. The unwillingness to cooperate, as I understand it, is that the family of the child wanted to maintain their privacy. I don't know what their reasoning was, but it's safe to say that being involved in litigation with the Kennedy family is a hornet's nest. As you have probably concluded, many of the Kennedy boys, and there are many, were poster boys for bad behavior, as written by cousin John F. Kennedy Jr. about Michael and Joe in an editorial for his magazine, George. For decades, these poster boys, and men and boys like them, have gotten away with things people like you and me could never get away with. We saw what rampant greed and unchecked power did for Alex Murdaugh and his family, right? I am in no way invalidating or negating the pain and suffering this family has clearly gone through. It has played out very publicly over all of these decades. And as I have tried to illustrate for you, bad behavior is riding shotgun. If you didn't understand the legacy of the Kennedys before, maybe you have a better understanding now. John Kennedy Jr., Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, and Lauren Bessette, their story has had some renewed energy, in large part because of Love Story, the series that is airing now on FX and Hulu. I am watching it, and I enjoy it, and I watch a lot of things about the Kennedys and the history and their legacy in Massachusetts. I always have. I make no apologies for that. For decades, the Kennedy family has been looked upon as America's royal family. In July of 1999, a small plane piloted by John Kennedy Jr. disappeared off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. You have heard me tell you the role that airplanes have had over decades of Kennedy family history. Each story is tragic, but for me, the crash of 1999 is the most tragic of all. I was inspired to talk about this story again because of Love Story, produced by Ryan Murphy. This series was inspired by Once Upon a Time, The Captivating Life of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, written by Elizabeth Beller. Ryan Murphy is behind a number of other productions in the true crime genre. Monster, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the Eric and Lyle Menendez story, the Ed Gein story, and the monster Lizzie Borden story, TBD. These series take a lot of liberties and have greatly upset family members, as has A Love Story. Jack Schlossberg, the 33-year-old son of Caroline Kennedy, nephew of John Jr., and the only grandson of John and Jackie Kennedy. Jack Schlossberg has been a spokesperson for his family. Unlike his uncle, Robert Kennedy, who exercises in jeans and drinks milk in a hot tub. Dudes, I just don't fucking get it. The main problem he has with the series is what he has called in the press a grotesque display of his late uncle's life, created by someone who never met his family and knows nothing about them. During an interview on CBS Sunday Morning, he stressed that the show should be viewed as fiction. There was absolutely no way for anyone to know the true, intimate lives of John and Carolyn, even the people closest to them. The public thinks they know, and the tabloid sure as hell wrote a lot about what they wanted to be happening. It's just another example of what countless other families go through. Families who have a murdered or missing loved one. Their loved one's story gets turned upside down. Jack Schlossberg is 33. He was 6 when his uncle died. He is running for office, New York's 12th congressional district. It is important to include that Jack's sister, Tatiana Schlossberg, died in December at 35 from acute myeloid leukemia. No one deserves that. Of her diagnosis, Tatiana Schlossberg has said, "I have added another new tragedy to my mother's life, to our family's life, and there is nothing I can do to stop it." Tatiana Schlossberg died at age 35, leaving behind 2 very small children. There is one comedic anecdote to her story that I can add here. In 2014, Tatiana Kennedy Schlossberg was working for the New York Times in the Metro section. She wrote about the mystery surrounding the dead bear in Central Park. What are the chances that Tatiana Kennedy Schlossberg writes a piece about the mysterious dead bear, only to find out later on that her very own uncle cousin, RFK Jr., is responsible? I know, I've been saying uncle, but he's more like their second cousin. I am seeing the evidence of the Carolyn effect. Carolyn Bessette was known for her very simple, yet sophisticated 90s style. I'd call it crisp, the opposite of my crumpled. All eyes were on them. It was something John Jr. was used to, but not Carolyn. She was a girl from Greenwich, Connecticut, another well-to-do town, but far from the ever-present eyes of the media. John Jr. was a pop culture magnet his entire life. Born just weeks after his father was elected president in 1960. He was always looked at as American royalty. And later, the tragedy. His mother, Jackie Kennedy, later Onassis, was a style icon in her own right. And it was her that created the notion of Camelot, this American dream of sorts. John Jr. met Carolyn Bessette, a star on the rise in fashion and public relations. She was from Greenwich, the largest town on Connecticut's affluent Gold Coast. It is home to affluence, financial movers, shakers, hedge funders, advertising executives. It's where Pete and Trudy moved on Mad Men. She would eventually find herself working for Calvin Klein in New York City. Carolyn and John would move in the same circles, New York's fashion, celebrity, society scenes. John Jr. was unnervingly comfortable with all the attention. Biking through New York City, rollerblading, running, playing football shirtless in the park. He lived a very different life, one of constant attention and constant expectation. Because of who he was, there was the constant question, would he get into politics? He did, sort of, when he launched George, a magazine that mixed politics with pop culture. John was now a magazine publisher. Could the world take him a little bit more seriously? For years, they taunted him with America's most eligible bachelor title. He was in his mid-30s by the time he and Carolyn started to date. They got more serious after John's mother, Jackie, died. The constant attention was difficult for Carolyn. When they did decide to get married, September of 1996, they chose a very remote location off the coast of Georgia, private and intimate. It was something very special for them to experience together with a small group of invited guests, and something Carolyn likely never experienced again. Carolyn was known for her style, not unlike her mother-in-law, and asked an up-and-coming designer at the time, Narcisco Rodriguez, to design her dress for her. They had worked at Calvin Klein together, and her dress helped launch his career. It was simple and elegant. Incredibly, they pulled off a wedding without media helicopters overhead. I imagine the compulsion to tell predates the advent of any and all social media. But imagine the restraint that would take today, not to post it all over for likes and looky-loos to gawk at. Their secret candlelight ceremony was held in a wooden chapel on the spectacularly gorgeous and very remote area off the southern coast of Georgia, near the Florida line, called Cumberland Island. It's not clear to me whether it was intentional to be candlelight. The church that they got married in was one room, no air conditioning, no electricity, so remote that the attendees had to be driven out in trucks. And if you are watching Love Story, the latest episode recreated the wedding. The remote island part is true. None of us can be sure what really happened that day. A very select group of people were in attendance. They won't tell. It was a family affair, 40 people in attendance. John's sister Caroline, John's cousin and dear friend Anthony Radswill was best man. Son of Jackie's sister, also named Caroline, Bouvier Canfield Radswill, who also was, by the way, a character among the Swans, another TV show out of the Ryan Murphy camp. Feud, Capote versus the Swans, remember that? Caroline's 2 daughters were the Flower Girls. Her son Jack was the ring bearer. They began their new life sharing a loft and a dog in New York City's Tribeca neighborhood, where John was often seen out walking, rollerblading, biking on the city streets. He loved New York. He was comfortable there. Remember, he grew up with eyes on him all the time. It's what he knew. Carolyn and John's relationship was constant fodder for New York City tabloids and some other choice national gossip rags. He was the heir to Camelot, a word synonymous with the JFK presidency, and Jackie as the first lady of the first family. I talk about crimes, criminal activity, and the like, but the way Carolyn was taunted and harassed by paparazzi, they called her names to get a rise out of her, lied to her, yelled at her, said horrible things. A truest kind of crime, if I may. They did not treat her the way they treated John. I'm not sure if John understood that, and it frustrated Carolyn. He had spent his entire life followed and spied on by reporters and photographers. Carolyn struggled with it, and it was a source of arguments that the couple had. There was no way to know what their actual conversations were about, but Carolyn had expressed her growing frustration with being stalked by them. I mean, prior to their wedding, she quit her job at Calvin Klein, a job that she had worked for years. The attention John got, and now Carolyn, by way of her relationship with him, it was relentless, and certainly took the attention off the brand. It is possible they were discussing getting a second place to live in Connecticut, in addition to their Tribeca apartment. John was running George, his politics meets pop culture / lifestyle, not your dad's magazine. It sure was not. Started in 1995 by John F. Kennedy Jr. and Michael J. Berman, they were 2 friends who went into business together and, well, butted heads. Even in the days before John died, he was looking for investors. John was somebody that was not used to asking people for things, but in his role as publisher, that's exactly what he had to do. A lot has been written about the women in death, but let's talk about how they lived. her sister Lauren, just 34, was reduced to a footnote in the story of epic family tragedy. Lauren was a twin. Lauren and her sister Lisa were 14 months older than Carolyn. The three were very close. Lisa is the only surviving Bessette daughter who, at the time of the crash, was in Munich working on her doctorate in Renaissance studies for the University of Michigan. Carolyn Jean Bessette was born on January 7, 1966 in White Plains, New York. She would be 60 years old this year. Her mother Anne was a teacher and school administrator. Her father William was an architectural engineer. And her two sisters, Lisa and Lauren, were twins, born November 5, 1964 in White Plains, New York. Their parents split when Carolyn was 8. When their mom remarried, she moved the girls to Greenwich, Connecticut. Her new husband, Richard Freeman, was a surgeon there. Carolyn would transfer to St. Mary's High School, where she was voted Ultimate Beautiful Person in her high school yearbook. Next, she went to Boston University, studying elementary education. At 6 feet tall, Carolyn gave modeling a try. She put together a portfolio, making the cover of the student calendar, The Girls of BU. She graduated in 1988. Sticking around Boston for a little while, working in nightclub promotions around the city. It's around that time she started a sales job with Calvin Klein and worked hard to become a publicist for the fashion brand. It is there where she first met John Kennedy Jr. in 1992. At the time, he was still seeing Daryl Hannah. Sidebar, Daryl Hannah, now married to Neil Young. The two did not start dating until 1994. The same year, John's mother, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, died. And once they were found out, paparazzi targeted her, publishing tabloid stories and making every private moment public. As the scene plays out in the Hulu show, John proposed to her while on the Cape. The pressure of being Mrs. John F. Kennedy Jr. was daunting to her. An example of how far the press would go, a public argument became an 8-page spread in New York Daily News. This level of attention only made things worse. Eventually, Carolyn would leave the job she loved at Calvin Klein. Sister Lauren was fiercely protective of Carolyn, especially when the story started circulating about who she might be dating. On the weekend of the plane crash, Lauren was with Carolyn. She wanted to be present with her, to help her and John work through some problems that they were having. Lauren was brilliant, driven, with an almost photographic memory. She had a generous spirit and a very dry sense of humor. She succeeded in everything she set out to do. She graduated from Hobart William Smith Colleges with a degree in economics. She was a member of the Omicron Delta Epsilon Honor Society. She moved to New York, where she worked for Morgan Stanley. She left only to study at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania and then came back to Morgan Stanley and spent 4 years in the Hong Kong branch. Asian markets were her specialty. In the winter before she died, she was promoted from a vice president to a principal in the investment banking division. She and Carolyn got closer when she came back to New York City and was there to support her through everything that she and John were going through. At the time, John had been staying at the Stanhope Hotel. It was Lauren who planned a lunch for the three of them in the days leading up to the plane crash. It was Lauren who encouraged them to go to the Cape that weekend together for Cousin Rory's wedding. It was Lauren who suggested joining them for the flight. While she avoided the spotlight, she was reportedly dating Kennedy cousin Bobby Shriver at the time. I'm not suggesting that Lauren is responsible for anything that happened that weekend. I'm sharing that information because of how truly supportive and loving she was to her sister. She loved Carolyn and she loved John. She wanted them to be happy, and she wanted them to be happy together. What we know about their final hours. It was Friday, July 16th. John and Lauren made a plan to meet in his office in Midtown. They would drive together to the airport in New Jersey, about an hour in traffic. John had just gotten his cast off from a broken ankle, but he was still using crutches. They were behind schedule, arriving at the airport closer to 8 o'clock. Carolyn is also coming from the city in a separate car. She arrives at Essex County Airport. There's no exact arrival time, but it was after 8 p.m. Carolyn was still unsure if she was going to attend the wedding with John up until the morning of the 16th. For Carolyn, being married to a Kennedy was exhausting. After talking with John, she agreed to go. She went to Saks to get a dress and then to get her nails done. It is what one does, especially if you weren't sure you were going to go. They were both feeling a lot of stress. Carolyn wanted a far less public life. They were both struggling. John was trying to keep his magazine afloat, and his cousin and best friend Anthony was dying of cancer. But Carolyn was there now, and they were going to the Cape together. Now, this may not have been something he was concerned with at the time, or perhaps he was feeling very confident with his flight skills. But their late departure would mean they were flying in the dark. And John had that broken ankle, something that happened over Memorial Day weekend in a paragliding mishap. Someone referred to that glider as a flying lawnmower. It definitely looked like it shared some parts. He was happy to get that cast off, but his ankle was still a little sore. He didn't seem too concerned about any of it. He was ready to fly. And despite the fact that his flight instructor offered to fly with him, John declined. He wanted to fly on his own. And John was the kind of guy that usually got what he wanted. The world would come to learn what a terrible mistake that was. The red and white Piper Saratoga, a single-engine, 6-seater, low-wing plane, had recently passed its annual inspection. Do I almost sound like I know anything about small planes? John had purchased the plane on April 28, 1999, less than 90 days before this flight. John had put in a number of hours with an instructor on another aircraft. He had not flown a lot in this Piper Saratoga. It was seasonably summer in New England, a high of 87 degrees that Friday. With that comes atmospheric conditions. And I am not a meteorologist. Surprise. John, with Carolyn, was setting off for a weekend with family on the Cape. Lauren was already going to the Vineyard. The plan to fly with them came later. John hoped it would do some good. Lauren did too. There was tension between Carolyn and John. They were working through some things, and Lauren came along as quiet support. Carolyn and Lauren were sitting together on the second row of seats on board the plane. John checked in with the control tower at the Vineyard Airport before his departure. At 8:38 p.m., the plane took off from Essex County Airport near Caldwell, New Jersey. Final destination, Barnstable Municipal Airport, with one stop in Vineyard Haven. Flight time was approximately 1 hour. John was a less experienced pilot. While he logged hundreds of flight hours, the darkness of the ocean, the summer haze, and limited visuals are challenges, and someone could easily lose sight of the horizon under such conditions. When a pilot is unable to see lights or other landmarks on shore, they must rely on the plane's instruments. The thing is, John had not qualified for a license to fly with instruments only, and it's hard to know if the ankle injury played any role in his ability to fly the aircraft. At 10:05 p.m., the Vineyard Airport contacted the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, located in Bridgeport, Connecticut, to report that the plane failed to arrive. Meanwhile, John's family in Hyannis anticipated his arrival around 11 p.m. As it started to become clear that their plane was now unaccounted for, they started to reach out to one another, including calling Lauren and Carolyn's mother, Anne Freeman, in Connecticut. Tensions were high. At 2:15 a.m., the Coast Guard station in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, was alerted that their plane was overdue. The Air Force Rescue Coordinating Center at Langley, Virginia, officially began the search at 3:28 a.m. The FAA reported last contact with their plane, apparently what they call a radar fix, 17 miles southwest of Martha's Vineyard, as it approached the airport at 9:39 p.m. Given that information, John should have been able to land that plane on the Vineyard by 10 p.m. The search got underway quickly, with the fleet of rescue and recovery vessels reporting to that space off the shores of Martha's Vineyard and centered along their flight path. News of their missing plane began to spread, and the media's reaction was intense. It was exactly the sort of thing that filled Carolyn Bessette Kennedy with dread. She had experienced this sort of media obsession over him and their relationship for all of their relationship. It was the source of most of their problems. News outlets gave the search around-the-clock coverage. Reporters did whatever they could to make their way to the Vineyard. And there were only two ways in, by air or by sea. Everybody wanted them to be found. It was on televisions everywhere, across Massachusetts and, well, nationwide. 3 very young people, a member of the Kennedy family, who had seen more than their share of tragedy. We thought, how could it be that John Kennedy Jr. would now die in a plane crash with his beautiful wife and her sister? It was so sad and so somber. I remember watching it. I remember worrying about it. Then came the reports of debris washing up on the shore. Pieces of carpet, a prescription bottle with Carolyn's name on it. People came out, standing on the shores, hoping, watching the search take place. It brought a lot of emotions to the surface for those folks who were old enough to remember when President Kennedy was shot. There was a kind of mourning for the loss of their favorite son, the boy who would one day fulfill the dreams of his father. On July 21st, Navy divers recovered the bodies of John, Carolyn, and Lauren from the wreckage of the plane. They were still strapped into their seats. Found 8 miles offshore in 116 feet of water. I hope it happened fast, because like Tatiana Schlossberg said, there was nothing I can do to stop it. It was a sadness that was especially poignant, given the relentless sum of tragedies that have haunted the Kennedy family over these years. A curse that, for decades, is widely believed to have extended to the children of JFK. For John Kennedy Jr., flying was the one time he felt truly free. Free of his family name, free of the expectations, free of the attention. On that night in July, John Jr. wanted to fly to the Cape on his own, like a big boy, despite only having 300 hours of flying experience. He did not accept the help of a flight instructor to fly with him. Although John started to learn to fly in 1982, he did not receive his private pilot's license until April 1998. By the July 1999 flight, he had logged only 72 hours of flight time without the assistance of an instructor, most of which were in a different model of airplane. In his Piper Saratoga, he had logged just 3 hours without an instructor. And of those hours, only 48 minutes were at night. An investigation began immediately. The National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB, the government agency responsible for civil transportation accident investigations. In this role, the NTSB was able to determine that the plane crashed into the ocean and likely caused by pilot error. Its report stated Kennedy's failure to maintain control of the airplane during a descent over the water at night, which was a result of spatial disorientation. Investigators studying the wreckage of the Piper Saratoga found no problems with its mechanical or navigational systems. In their final report released in 2000, the NTSB concluded that the crash was caused by an inexperienced pilot who became disoriented in the dark and lost control. At 9:41 p.m., the plane piloted by John F. Kennedy Jr. crashed nose first into the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 7.5 miles southwest of Gay Head, Aquinnah, Martha's Vineyard. The radar data examined after showed the plane had plummeted from 2,200 feet to 1,100 feet in a span of 14 seconds and disappeared from radar. On the evening of July 21st, the bodies of John, Carolyn, and Lauren were autopsied at the county medical examiner's office. The findings revealed that they died on impact. The Kennedy and Bessette families announced their plans for memorial services. On July 21st, the 3 bodies were taken from Hyannisport to Duxbury, Massachusetts, where they were cremated at the Mayflower Cemetery Crematorium. On the morning of July 22nd, family and close friends boarded the USS Brosco, and their cremated remains were released back to the sea off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. It was truly the end of an era. Little John, who saluted his father, who became John Kennedy, sexiest man alive, magazine publisher. I think the one thing that John longed for was a normal life with Carolyn. It was something that had proved unattainable up until that point. They were trying. Oh, and nobody in his family called him John, by the way. That was just made up by some newspaper reporter way back when. He had a significant role in the legacy of his father, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The world remembers the salute of a child for his father one last time. John Kennedy Jr. grew up seeing his father the way most of us saw him, in videos and photographs, in the pages of his books. It became Jackie's life's work after her husband was killed to maintain his legacy. The Kennedy presidency was like the era of Camelot, a mythical period that accompanied a sense of fulfilled promise. This history was not lost on Carolyn, and the pressure of being Mrs. John F. Kennedy Jr. could be suffocating. A private mass for John and Carolyn was held on July 23rd at the Church of St. Thomas More in Manhattan, John's mother's church. Before the 300 invited guests, the family's surviving patriarch, Senator Uncle Ted Kennedy, delivered a moving eulogy. From the first day of his life, John seemed to belong not only to our family, but to the American family. He had a legacy, and he learned to treasure it. He was part of a legend, and he learned to live with it. No child offered hope to a nation like John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. had back then. Remember, in 1963, the world had witnessed the President of the United States assassinated in public. It was absolutely traumatic for a nation. People lined the streets of D.C. to pay tribute, silent tribute, as his flag-draped casket passed by. The emotions were magnified by watching Jackie Kennedy. How she handled herself, how she handled the murder of her husband, how she handled her children. And like Tori Amos sang, the country prayed for Jackie's strength. I grew up in New England. Many of you know I grew up in New England. I talk about it proudly. More often than not, you would walk into somebody's house and they would have a picture of John F. Kennedy hanging on the wall, sometimes next to Jesus. After what happened that day in Dallas, Jackie was desperate to keep her children safe. And she succeeded for the most part, but I can't imagine what a private hell that could be for her. He went to the best schools and eventually went on to law school at NYU. I know he felt an enormous pressure to be something. He was young, he was rich, he was famous, he was very good looking. So came the cameras that followed him and his love life. There was great interest in this boy of Camelot. What was he doing, and who was he doing it with? He was romantically linked to celebrities like Madonna and Julia Roberts, Daryl Hannah, Sarah Jessica Parker, who called John a public domain kind of guy. I take that to mean that if you're dating John Kennedy Jr., it's never just the two of you. But there was something special about Carolyn. Once he met her, he could not shake her. They struggled. He only knew public life. She only wanted a private one. What would ultimately become of them? I'd like to believe they could work it out. The Kennedy family suffered so many losses. I told you about many of them. It's not all of them. John F. Kennedy Jr. was gone at 38. The Bessette and Freeman families lost 2 girls. One sister lost her twin. In their reporting, the NTSB did not specifically blame John for the accident in so many words, though the findings were pretty clear. John was not experienced enough for those conditions. Would it have been a successful flight if they had left sooner? Yes, no, maybe so. Was it poor judgment? Entitlement? He is gone. So is the chance to make a different choice. Anne Freeman, mother of Carolyn and Lauren, sued the Kennedy estate for the wrongful death and conscious pain and suffering, though it wasn't officially disclosed. Carolyn and Lauren's family settled with the Kennedy estate for some $15 million. A very small consolation, given she lost her 2 girls. On the night of the crash, Anne Freeman was panic-stricken. According to the book co-written by JFK Jr.'s former assistant and friend Rosemary Terenzio, it's called JFK Jr., An Intimate Oral Biography. The author had spoken to Anne that night. In those terrified moments, she said she had forbidden John from taking 2 of her girls up in the plane at the same time. How could this happen? No family deserves that. Anne Freeman passed away in 2007. The inspiration for the FX series Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, is a book called Once Upon a Time, The Captivating Life of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy by Elizabeth Beller. The heir to everything is Caroline Kennedy. And the heir to that dream of his grandfather is her son, Jack Schlossberg. He is young, he is wise, and he is running for office in New York. And away we go. Thank you for listening. I have spent a lot of time learning about these people. It's really a very sad story. Despite the fame and fortune and attention and good looks and all of those things, what they longed for was some normalcy. I really wish that John and Carolyn got a chance to love each other. My name is Angelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind, Massachusetts and New England crime stories in history and happenings. Everything about the show, crimeofthetruestkind.com. I will be updating the episode page with all of the information and sources that I use for this episode. Love Story, John Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, is airing now on FX and Hulu. I watch it. I enjoy it. I know that the Kennedy family had some admonishments. I don't know exactly what to call it, but I think by and large they do a nice job. I think they've been pretty respectful. It's not always the case with something that Ryan Murphy is involved in. I've talked about that with you before. Follow the show at Crime of the Truest Kind. There are a number of ways to support the show. Follow on social media. Tell your friends. Like and subscribe. Leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Drop a tip in the jar. My dogs will thank you for it. Become a patron on Patreon. I have stickers and pins. I would love to send some out in the post. I am long overdue for that. There is some merch. I plan on bringing back the old store. It is a story that I do not need to tell you about. It's pretty boring. Email the show, crimeofthetruestkind@gmail.com. Come to a live show, next one, Thursday night, March 12th, off Cabot, Beverly, Massachusetts. We're talking about missing persons cases across the Commonwealth. Thank you for listening. More episodes to come. If I can release 2 episodes per month, that would make me happy. I'm really busy. It is a lot of work, but I don't want to stop doing this podcast. I really love doing it, and I really love that you love the podcast. I am going to go now. Take good care and lock your goddamn doors.